All right, so now starting officially, our welcome to Coby Owens, Chair of the Wilmington City Council Task Force on Reparations. There have been news items about it in the paper here recently. Perhaps you've seen those, perhaps not. But Coby is going to introduce the topic of reparations in general and the work that the task force is charged with. The steps they have taken so far, the plan going forward, and then we'll have an opportunity for dialogue, discussion, question and answer at the end. So welcome, Coby.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always good to be with y'all. Again, my name is Coby Owens. I come to you today as your friend, your neighbor, and your fellow good troublemaker. And I'm here to talk about a subject that I'm super excited to be working on. I know the other members of the task force are super excited to be working on this. And this is what will reparations look like here for the city of Wilmington? At the end of 2020, a part of the great civil uprising that we saw during that year, a year that I don't think any of us on January 1st knew what that year was going to entail. We did not know that we were going to face a global pandemic that a lot of us are still dealing with today. We also did not know that we were going to see people across the world stand up and say Black Lives Matter, and that individuals should not be brutalized or murdered based on the simple fact that they have different skin. Um, and a part of some of those ads that came out of 2020 was the demand for reparations and the I'll say the topic became a very hot topic in 2020, but it definitely was not a new topic at all. There have been people who have been doing work on this for decades. And then also, I want to give homage to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee and Senator Cory Booker in the US Senate and US Congress, who introduced HR 40 to really push this conversation forward about what is reparations and what it should look like here in America. Reparations, again, the call for reparations right now is for African American descendants of slaves here in the United States of America. And again, as we celebrate Juneteenth more, as we take on different issues and see different issues come to light, there has been studies done. There have been task force formed, like the one here in the city of Wilmington. But the real goal is, what will it look like? So far, right now, the city of Wilmington reparations task force is made up of 11 people appointed by the city council. And we come from all different backgrounds, whether it's education, judicial, community based. We have, in my mind, we have a great group of people with a wealth of knowledge about African Americans, about different pain points that we face throughout our community, and then also just individuals who have lived through some of America's darkest days. Right now, where we're at, we are in the research and planning stage of this. So we have had a few meetings as a task force, and we've talked about different pain points. We've had presentations on education. Our most recent one was about health disparities, and that one dived into cancer clusters, different environmental impacts that we've had to deal with. Um, Also looking at, overall mortality rates, Black maternal health. We've looked at environment. We've looked at legal. We've looked at our housing crisis, right? Delaware did not have a in-depth mapped out redlining, right? It was not like other states. But combing through deeds that clearly state that you cannot sell to an African American, or they use the N word in some, that you cannot sell to a Negro. Right here in the city of Wilmington, there's deeds currently in Brandywine Hills and 40 acres in Wawasset Park that still have that wording a part of that deed. We're looking through all of it to see where any disparities have been created that has led to a greater racial divide here in our city, whether it's a wealth divide, wealth divide, educational divide, or just has oppressed African Americans. So many of you may think, hey, how can I get involved, right? Why is this so important? Why is it happening right now? What took so long? Um, Again, this has been centuries in the making, but I really want to commend the 108th City Council for finally taking the step of appointing people to this task force and allowing individuals who have expertise in these areas to really start rolling up their sleeves and building out a framework for a recommendation for the city, which then will go to the city council and then go once it's to the city council and the mayor, it will be up to them to decide what they want to do with those recommendations. But the way we get the best and most community centered one is having the community there, right? Making sure we're bringing awareness that of the work that we're doing on this task force, the research that we're doing, looking for additional pain points or data points that people would like to share with us that we may not even have access to right now. We've had people from all parts of the city reach out to tell us about things that they dealt with growing up that they would like us to look into as we make these overarching recommendations in January of 2024. We have we have less than 180 days, but in January of 2024, we will make our final recommendations. Actually, I believe it's January 6th, a very famous date now, is when we're set to make those recommendations. But again, like I said, this isn't going to be a one and done type ordeal. This is looking at how can we create a better quality of life. We know that there's wealth disparities unlike any other in the world happening right now. We, as African Americans in the city of Wilmington, we have 10 times less wealth than our white counterparts. When it comes to overall our housing situation, this city has now become a majority renter based city. But yet we have hundreds and hundreds of vacant properties sitting out there. When you talk about wanting to stabilize neighborhoods and really reduce crime as well too, the best way to do that is stabilize neighborhoods. That is to get people into homes that are safe, that are affordable, and hopefully that they own as well too, so that they can start building generational wealth. When you look at our education system, while the city of Wilmington City Council may not have control over our schools, right? The city is broken up into 5 different school districts. No other entity is broken up like that here in the state of Delaware. We have Brandywine, we have Red Clay, we have Colonial, we have Christina, and then we have the VOTEC schools that make up the city of Wilmington. We do have control over our early education, right? And our workforce development education as well, too. We all know that 0 to 5 is the most critical time period for any young person. That will help determine what your career path will be, where you will end up, whether you go to college, whether you become a CEO or a director somewhere, or whether you will end up in jail. We know that they look at numbers based on your 3rd grade scores on how many beds they need for the prisons in the next 10 years, right? So we can get to young kids prior to that and really invest in making sure that they are getting the most educational opportunities possible. It can really change the trajectory of a generation. When looking at our workforce here in the city of Wilmington, looking at what jobs are here and what jobs that we currently do not have enough workers for, and making sure we get people trained to be ready to go into those jobs, especially into some of the growing fields out there, the technology fields, the fintech, and also infrastructure and construction jobs as well too. There's a lot of money that's going to be coming into the state. Um, and then also on top of that, looking at environmental issues. The city of Wilmington has been known. We sit not far from a landfill that blows chemicals right in our face every time we have a bad storm. Looking at the impacts of that, impacts of the flooding, individuals who are having, who've had issues getting simple flood insurance, knowing that they're in flood zones and insurance companies did not want to pay out when incidents did happen, like what happened over at Ida. Um, so, you know, we're just looking at a whole host of things here in the city of Wilmington, both acknowledging the historical and ongoing oppression and discrimination that Black people have faced here in the state of Delaware, in the city of Wilmington, in America over the last 400 years. Um, and again, it's from slavery, it's Jim Crow lines, it's redlining, it's mass incarceration, systematic racism, and its devastating effects has caused generations and generations of trauma and pain. And we view reparations as a way to start to address some of that harm and provide opportunities for healing as well too. So that's kind of where we're at in our work right now. Again, I want to give a shout out to all our task force members who are doing amazing work in their different communities. But also, I would love to talk to you, hear some questions, some concerns, ideas about what you think here in the city of Wilmington, what else we can be doing, and how y'all can get involved as well too. CJ?
If you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand and we'll go around. Casey, I think you hit the buzzer first.
Hi, Mr. Owens. Could you tell us a bit about what your charge was from the council or the city?
Yes. So the charge was to look at systematic racial disparities, racist practices, procedures, institutional discrimination against African Americans here in the city of Wilmington, and make recommendations in a form of reparations to how to, whether it's address, heal, or rectify some of those issues.
Let's see, Marge, I think you had your hand up. Did you put it down?
I did put it down because that was my question as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's see, Zoom user. What question or comment do you have?
Sue, is that Maria?
I don't know. It just says Zoom. There are two Zoom users on here. Sarah is one, but
Okay.
Sarah's.
Sarah, did you have a question? Go ahead.
I need you to unmute, Sarah.
No, I didn't.
Oh, there are two people on here listed as Zoom user. Sarah is one. I can see her picture. The other are a couple folks who signed on early who were traveling. So,
here I am.
Now we have a face. All right, very good.
So I have a question. Is there, again, it's part of, what your mandate is and how broad is it? I mean, when we look at reparations, I think of slaves that I'm sure existed here who worked for nothing, and families that lost equity there. I think of real estate and redlining. I think of losses in education based on lack of opportunity. I think of mortgages that were never given. I think of Delaware veterans who never got housing or educational benefits. So when I look at all of those pockets, and I'm just naming a few off the top of my head, I can think of in each pocket where in each one of them, Blacks have been limited, certainly economically. And so I want to know, how many pockets are you looking into?
Yeah, so the main we call them pain points that we're looking into is housing, education, health, environmental, criminal justice and legal are kind of the same pain point. And then the last one is again, did I say education? Yeah, education, health, environmental. I'm forgetting the last one. I apologize. But we're looking into 6 different pain points right now. Oh, economic disparity. I'm so sorry. So how we broke it down is we kind of paired them up, right? So economic disparity and housing are together. So we have multiple task members looking into research there. We're also working with different community groups as well too, who have data and reports that they've done on these disparities as well too. We put health and environmental together. Again, we're working with different groups on that as well too. And each kind of subgroup has multiple task force members assigned to it. And then the last one, again, which I think is one of the biggest, is education. We really have a vast number of people looking at the different aspects of that, because it doesn't matter what age you are at, you can always learn something new.
No, that's great. That's great. I'd be particularly interested if you could give me a little bit more detail about the criminal justice end. I mean, when I think of men who have been incarcerated and through the probation system kept incarcerated for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and how those families have suffered and how they have gotten no economic, just a lot of economic suffering in addition to a lot of other, so I hope we are looking at how do we help those families, those children particularly. I mean, because it's the whole family in the criminal system that suffers. It's not just the individual.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at it, our criminal justice system, it's a tale of two stories, right? It's the tale of the poor and the tale of the rich. A poor, low income African American male can sit in jail for 3 years on pre-trial for a charge that he only has to serve 6 months total in jail. But yet he just wasted 3 years of his life sitting in jail because he simply could not pay the bail to get out. We here in Delaware, we have a lot of people who are sitting on pretrial right now. We have prisons that are overcrowded. We have individuals who, again, because they finally make it out of our justice system, but because of unrealistic check-in periods with their probation and parole, they then get additional fines or they get sent back to jail, which then causes them to lose their job, which then causes them not to have any income coming in. So therefore, they can't pay the fine. So they get a fine for not paying a fine prior to that, right? So it creates a never-ending cycle for so many people here in the city of Wilmington. And if you really break it down, right, if you break it down by the zip codes, that 19801 and 19802, which are both city zip codes, is where a lot of those people who fall into that cycle come from. You also look at individuals where we have, let's talk about the recently legalized marijuana, right? Laws like that have been used to disproportionately target African American males here in the state of Delaware, but also across the entire country, where it is a well-documented, well-researched point that individuals that use marijuana is about the same across the board between African Americans and white Americans, right? But the disparities in who's actually arrested and charged in that is a great, vastly different. Outside of that, I would also say there has been some efforts to address fines and fees. I know one of your members, Lynn Kilhorn, works very hard with the fines and fees and the coalition, the campaign to end prison debtors. That has created some change, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And I'm glad that they're doing the work. And we look to just amplify some of that stuff that they have accomplished and that they are looking to accomplish in our report as well, too.
Thank you. Roger Reinecker, your hand is up next, I think.
Thank you, Coby, for speaking to our group. Reparations seems to be a very hot topic right now, not just here, but I would imagine throughout the state. Of course, in Florida, if you even talk about reparations, they throw you out of school, because we even saw on the news tonight that if you speak about a certain topic, then that might lead to discussions of critical race theory, which might lead to talk of reparations, which apparently is a chain of events that are just unbelievably bad in Florida. But otherwise, have your committee members been able to take into account any other discussions of reparations that have occurred around the country? I don't know what states and what municipalities, what county level. You got state, you got county, you got city, all potentially could have reparation discussions. And I wonder if you've been able to take advantage of others and what their ideas have been that have affected what you've done.
Absolutely, absolutely. So first off, down in Florida, yes. How they have attacked any history point involving African Americans is extremely sad. And me personally, I believe it's what led to the Jacksonville shooting just the other day at the Dollar Tree. But when it comes to what others are doing with reparations, we have looked at a few other studies. I think the first study that pretty much everyone is looking at right now is the Evanston, Illinois, which was one of the first cities to start a reparations program. If I remember correctly, it's $25,000 for housing repair, down payment for a mortgage. And they have some other recommendations in it, but that was their big point. They had a lot of policy change recommendations and things like that. The next one is probably California. California put out almost a 450 page document detailing their reparations recommendations. Now, I will say they had a lot longer and a lot more resources than us. They had almost 2 years worth of time to develop their recommendations. It was written into epilogue language in the California state budget, which means they had staff, they had a set budget, annual budget that they can bring in researchers and expert witnesses and stuff like that. We do not have a budget whatsoever. Council did not allocate a budget. So therefore, most of the research is being done by task force members or by experts who are volunteering their time and their resources to us so that we can make the most well-centered and well community-rounded recommendations possible.
Thank you. Casey?
You're muted.
Still muted, Casey.
Sorry. I think a part of my question has just been answered because I wanted to ask, how you actually do your work. Did you have a budget? Do you have a staff? How do you get this monumental task done? You've just said you don't have a budget.
We
And
don't have a
also this is
budget.
volunteer. So I'm just curious, how much are you handicapped by this sort of circumstance of?
I think most of us are used to working on shoestring budgets anyway, so we can make a lot of things happen. I will say we do have a project manager, Shawnee Blair, who is absolutely amazing and keeps us on task and make sure we are moving forward in the direction we need. I don't know where we would be without her. But outside of that, again, you know, we are used to rolling up our sleeves. We're used to having to find that, to have that grit to get things done. A lot of us come from those backgrounds already. Even though most of us work in the nonprofit or educational realm now, it took us a long time to get to where we're at right now. So we know how to work that way. And again, we're using our own networks to kind of help us move things further along.
Marge, before I go to you, I understand, Coby, that you are holding a number of community meetings, open meetings, focused on particular topic areas, maybe the pain points that you described. So there's a schedule for those public meetings that is available if people want to come and hear what's being said or offer their own history or experience. Is there a way to readily find out what those topic areas are and when they're scheduled?
Yes, so because of FOIA, all our agendas have to be publicly notified at least 7 days prior to the meeting. We just did 4 meetings every other week for the last 2 months. So now what we're gonna be taking a little break from doing a public meeting to do some more research and allow us to compile some more data. And then our next meeting is going to be September 25th at the Wilmington City Council building, 800 North French Street in the committee room. So if you come in through security, you go straight to the back and it's a committee room right there. All people are welcome. We also realize, again, we're still dealing with COVID and also not everyone can make it in person. All our meetings are hybrid. We push for that heavily. So if you can't join us in person, you can join us via Zoom. The Zoom link changes, so you have to go to the city's website for each meeting to find out what that Zoom link is for that meeting. But again, we make sure we give public comment at every meeting as well.
And is there a particular topic for the September 25th meeting?
So not as of right now. It's more of presenting of research and where we're at so far. We may decide to add a presentation if need be, but at this point, as of today, there is no presentation that's going to be a part of the September 25th meeting.
Okay, thank you. Marge, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Coby, for all this information. I have to confess I'm a little astounded that this committee is meeting because, in my opinion, city council is somewhat dysfunctional. And I'm wondering, are you the only group working on reparations in Delaware? Are there other groups in the county, in the various counties or different cities that are working on this as well?
So there was a question in the chat too. The meeting starts at 6 p.m. But in regards to the question just asked, so unfortunately we are the only group in the state of Delaware working on this currently. But since this has started and since it has started to get some media attention, individuals from different smaller towns and cities throughout Delaware, and all 3 counties has reached out to ask about the process of potentially doing the same in their areas as well too. I know one of the conversations I would love to have is, can we do this on either a county-wide basis or a statewide basis, and look at the entire history of the state, I'll say. It is sad, but in most places, it's very few entities that are actually approving task force or work groups to do this type of research. Now, there's independent groups that do national work. There is the Black Voters Matter has launched a reparations fund to help fund some of the research in states such as like North Carolina, Alabama, and a few other states, I believe Georgia as well too. They haven't really come to Delaware. Delaware is the 7th Blackest state though, and has always had a very high African-American population.
I think often, excuse me, when the topic of reparations comes up, what sometimes is the perspective is that this means writing a check to every African American in the country. And I know in the case of California, when they put together their program, and in essence said, if every African American descendant of slaves were, quote, made whole, it's billions and billions and billions of dollars. And of course, then the question always is, how does that get paid and where does that come from? At the same time, I believe, excuse me, I believe that there has also been a focus on the systems that have disadvantaged African Americans and ways of investing in the systems in a way that helps to rectify the harm that's been done. Zero interest mortgages, educational support programs and reform, getting at what were the elements of discrimination that occurred and how might they be funded or managed or prioritized in a way that help rectify the damage that's been done. Is your group looking at specifically financial payment reparations, at systemic support changes? Is it too soon to know what you're going to come up with as you're gathering the information?
So I think it is a little too soon to clearly state exactly what those recommendations are going to look like, but from the conversations that we've had, and the conversations that the public's had as well too, it seems as though a lot of people are in the same mindset that let's change the system to make it work better for future generations, and less of let's just cut a big check, right? Now, granted, there should be some avenues to kind of help rectify those issues. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people want to see a system change, and also realizing that at the city level, it's only so much that they can do. Whether it's, I think it has to come a little higher. Go a little higher with whether it's the state or the federal government stepping in.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Eugene Robinson wrote a piece, can never remember if it's New York Times or the Washington Post. I suppose that gives away the nature of my reading material sources. But in any case, as a consequence of the shooting in Jacksonville, he made the point, which has been made repeatedly by people with an appreciation and an awareness of our history, and the discrimination that is grounded in slavery and has continued through public policy for, as you say, 400 years. And the fact that so many Americans are not aware, do not know what's been done, how intentional it was, what the consequences have been, and that we need to find ways to better inform and educate people about what actions in our history have created this situation. We live with stereotypes, we live with beliefs about African Americans in particular, but we do that with all kinds of groups of people. But what we don't know is about Reconstruction, about Black codes, about Jim Crow laws, about mass incarceration, about the GI Bill, about the FHA, about neighborhood security maps, about redlining, about mortgages being denied. The history tells us what has led us to this point, and we need to find a way to ground ourselves in the history so that we can have meaningful conversations about A, what led us here, and B, what do we need to do about it? And it's a huge hill to climb. And there is obviously enormous resistance to varying degrees in varying places. Some of you know I teach a class series called Racism in America, the history we didn't learn in school. And my most recent class was taught at the Villages in Florida, which is not what you would think of as a predominant target population. And yet, the people there who attended and participated did so and learned what they didn't know. And so Eugene Robinson's point was, as many others have made the point, we can't move forward. We can't get past this if we can't have meaningful, honest conversations based on our history. And excuse me, this must be my COVID kicking in. Aren't you all glad we're not in the same room together?
Hope you feel better though soon.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. But the
And you're
challenge
scaring the
is,
hell out of me.
the challenge is how to engage in that conversation about history with people who don't think it's relevant, don't appreciate the role that it plays. And so how do we move forward? I don't know what the answer to that is, but clearly it's pivotal.
I would agree. I think overall, through this study, through the research, I've been studying this for a long time now, but having even more access to data has really opened my eyes even deeper into some of the ills here in the first state. And at the end of the day, regardless of what we do recommend, we're still going to have a lot of work to do here in the first state and here in the city of Wilmington. And that's why it's so important for us all to come together and start to work to dismantle, especially some of these policies that have been in place for decades now. We've seen the General Assembly, the General Assembly kind of change over the last, I'll say, 4 years. So using that to our advantage, at least while we have the power right now, to make sure we do as much positive good for our community as possible.
Thank you. And a Zoom user, you have your hand up again. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Sue. It's me again. Sue, I agree with everything you said, and I think that reparations, to me, is not just a monetary thing. I know that we can't we really can't change people's hearts and minds, but I, like you, am a firm believer that education can go a long way. I can't let go of that hope. And so I think part of reparations should be a concise educational system at various levels, ages, in schools, in colleges, in communities, where there is exposure to all of the information and facets that you have exposed us to. I think also reparations, again, can be seen as opportunities that we give to first home buyers, except that in this case, we're not going to give them just the opportunity for not having the down payment, but we're going to give them the lowest mortgage rate going. And we're going to assist them on how to take care of their properties, because you buy a fixer-upper and that can be very expensive, especially when you don't know what you're doing and you're a first home buyer, or if you're a single female head of household. So I think of reparations in many other ways. For example, the University of Delaware assisting Black students to, number one, be able to qualify, number two, get a seat at the table, number three, get adequately mentored and supported during that process and during that process of higher education, which may be new to a lot of these families. So again, I see a lot of ways of making reparations, but I also feel very strongly, and I'm concerned. And Coby, you're doing a phenomenal job, and thank you for you and the other members that are working with you. But I find it hard to believe that there is no funding and no support. I was wondering if some funding could be raised even from the Delaware Historical Society. There must be the DuPonts. There must be somebody willing to give some funding towards some assistance with this research that you're doing to look at what's happening nationally. What indeed do we have locally to look at? It's a lot of work, and then it takes forever. And frankly, I think that's the idea, that it should take forever. And I'm really concerned that there is no funding. To me, this says, and I'm sorry, but I have to be frank, this tells me that the state of Delaware really doesn't have the heart or the muscle. You know how much data points you're going to have to deal with? How many, what do you call those data systems that we have to put up for keeping all this when we're doing systems? This takes time, this takes energy, this takes data. And I don't hear that any of that is being supplied to you, nor the funding.
So, unfortunately, the state has, so a few things. So this is a city-based task force, so the city would have to allocate the money for this. But then also, I agree with you about UD and institutions like that. Unfortunately, city council has no power over them, right? So this is why I would love to see this conversation expand to the state level, right? And the state, in the past, right, when they formed task force, they usually write into the epilogue language how long the task force is going to last, how much money is going to be allocated to them, and the staffers that are going to be allocated to that as well, too, whether it's hiring new staffers or consultants or using state workers that are already there, depending on who's running the task force, right? So there is an African-American task force going on right now. It does not focus on reparations, but that task force is written into the epilogue language. It has paid staffers and things like that. The city council did not allocate funds. But, like I said earlier, we still make it happen, right? We still will figure out a way to make sure we get all the work done. The community is really showing up and showing out in helping us do this research as well too, and compiling this research, and then it's going to be on us to craft a well-rounded report.
And I guess what that leads to is the question of what happens after the report is produced and prepared and published. And of course, nobody knows at the moment what that will look like, but clearly the report is an essential first step, and the work that you're doing, while more funding and more resources might make more information available, I think the fundamental story is the story, and the report will reflect that. A fundamental question will be, then what? We are famous, particularly in the education arena, but other arenas, of doing studies and making really good recommendations, which gather dust on the shelf. And I think what that also raises is the need, the potential opportunity for a focus on the General Assembly and its agenda in the upcoming session to push forward for a reparations assessment study program recommendations for the state. And I think building on the work that your team is doing, utilizing that as a starting point and saying, but that's all this is. And what we really need to be doing, particularly in a state of our size, is focusing on these issues and taking meaningful action. And so there's a role for all of us to play in developing some recommendations, some bills, working with legislators to get that on the agenda, on the docket for the General Assembly in the coming session. Marge, your hand is up.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, you may have said this, Coby, but I must have missed it. Do you have a date for which the council wants you to report back? Let's see, Coby.
I think he mentioned that it was January 24th, January in 24.
Okay, thank you. I missed that.
Sorry, I was putting my email in the chat for everyone. It's January 6th, 2024 is the deadline for the recommendation to the entire city council. We're looking to potentially have a preliminary report out prior to that. Come do some community engagement events where we can take some feedback, go back, edit, add, take out whatever we may need, and then prepare for that final date.
So I guess, Coby, as we're wrapping this up, what's the best way for us to keep up with what's happening and what the next steps are? Is it the Wilmington City Council website? Is that the best
Yes.
site? Okay.
That's probably the best. Any information because of FOIA, because this is a public task force, any meetings that we're going to be holding will be updated immediately to that website. And that's the best way to stay in contact with us. If y'all have any additional questions or concerns or want to send me an email, I'll put my email in the chat, or you could email the vice chair, who is Shane Cannon, or our project manager, Shawnee Blair, as well too.
Okay, thank you. And we really do want to thank you for the passion and the energy and the commitment that you and the task force are putting into this. We know no one has forced you to do this. Nobody has assigned this as a task. And it is that commitment and that passion that can work wonders. And we thank you for your energy and for your engagement. And we will follow the progress, and we will be prepared to, once the report is issued, to say, okay, so now what? And see what happens next. So thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you to Coby and the team. Our good friend B.B. Coker, I believe, is a member of the task force. And
Yes.
BB is a pistol. So anyway, we know this is just a small baby step, but it is an important one. And we thank you for your efforts and your energy. And thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks
week-
for having me.
Next week, our program is Race and the Jury. And it is associated with issues of less than full representation of citizens in our country on juries in the criminal justice system, and the consequences that derive from that, and the actions that are needed to rectify that, to ensure that, as promised, anyone accused of a crime is entitled to be judged by a jury of their peers. So we hope you'll join us next week. Thank you again for being here.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.